My medical records list treatments that never happened. The hospital did not occupy much attention after discharge. The stay itself had followed standard procedures and was not marked by any documented incidents. Care progressed as expected, and discharge was completed with a small set of routine documents. For a few days, the papers remained on a kitchen counter beneath a bowl of fruit. Each time they were passed, the hospital logo on the top page remained visible, carrying the same subdued institutional presence. Then routine activity resumed. Emails, laundry, the quiet administrative work of scheduling obligations and overlooking some of them. When an insurance letter arrived requesting supporting documentation, it followed a familiar format: a discharge summary, a medication list, and an itemized charge sheet. One afternoon, the documents were reviewed with the same methodical attention usually given to assigned tasks. The contents followed a familiar structure: patient name and birth date, dates of admission and discharge, assigned unit, a list of diagnoses that appeared more severe in documentation than suggested elsewhere in the records. Names of nurses and attending physicians were listed, recognizable only as standard entries associated with routine care. Each page was reviewed for material relevant to the request. Several lines were marked for reference. The documents performed their usual function, converting the details of an inpatient week into organized, standardized fields. The review then reached the medication administration record. It was the kind of page that would not typically draw attention without close examination. A grid with dates down one side, times across the top, and medication names in the left column. Each entry contained initials, sometimes a full signature. Small notes such as held or patient refused, the type of language that maintains an appearance of order. It was briefly noted as unusual that this page was included at all. There was no documented request for its inclusion, nor any indication that it had been specifically sought. Still, the page remained present within the packet. The first several entries aligned with expectations. Pain medication requested twice and administered once. A mild anti-nausea tablet offered and declined. A stool softener suggested in the routine manner often applied broadly to patients. All of these entries aligned with documented patterns commonly associated with inpatient care. Then, approximately halfway down the record, additional medications appeared that were not immediately identifiable. These were not obscure brand names that could be reasonably assumed to correspond to familiar treatments. The names did not appear elsewhere in the surrounding documentation. They were longer, more deliberate in structure, with endings that required careful pronunciation. A few of them were paired with dosage amounts that appeared calculated rather than rounded. They were recorded as administered, not ordered, not marked as PRN or as needed. Administered, with times stamped in regular, orderly increments across multiple days. The entries were reviewed again, this time with closer attention. It was considered that omissions can occur in patient recollection. People forget. Hospitals contain many small, repetitive moments that blur together. A nurse during overnight hours. The sound of equipment cycling. A plastic cup with a faint residual taste. However, these medications did not appear on the home medication list. They were not included among the discharge prescriptions sent to the pharmacy. They were not referenced in any documented morning rounds. There was no record of explanations such as, "We're starting you on this," or "We're going to taper you off that." There was no documentation indicating that the medications had been ingested or acknowledged at the recorded times. During the inpatient stay, a simple routine was followed. Medications were taken when presented as scheduled. Questions were asked when they arose. Rest occurred in fragmented intervals. Morning light was observed filtering through the blinds in regular patterns. There was no indication that medication names were being actively tracked by the patient. Even so, certain details are typically retained. The sensory aspects of medication administration are often remembered. The rapid dissolution of a pill. The way a nurse states a patient's name before administering a dose. The small paper cup used for delivery. These entries did not correspond with any such recollection. The pages were set aside, and the table was observed for a period of time. There was no immediate sense of fear. The reaction more closely resembled the recognition of an administrative discrepancy, an error similar to filing under an incorrect year, something that should not exist but does. The simplest explanation was considered first. It was possible that the medications had been ordered and later discontinued, but the system recorded them as administered in error. It was possible that entries had been pulled from another patient's chart. It was possible that a software issue had duplicated information across accounts. The hospital maintained a patient portal. It had been accessed infrequently, primarily for appointment information. That afternoon, access was made to the section labeled Medications. The same entries appeared. A list of current medications, largely empty, and a list of medications administered during the inpatient stay. The same unfamiliar names, aligned with start and stop dates matching the admission period. Each entry listed a prescriber. The prescriber's name appeared unremarkable. A first initial, a common surname, no distinctive title, only MD appended at the end, functioning as a formal designation. The name was selected without any specific expectation. A standard profile window opened, the type commonly used by hospitals to present staff information, department, credentials, and occasionally a photograph if one had been provided. No photograph was present. A department was listed, internal medicine. A phone extension was provided. An office location was listed. There was also a line that read, Provider status, active. The designation was noted without immediate explanation. Active, similar in implication to a switch set in a fixed position. An attempt was made to determine whether any interaction with a physician by that name had occurred. Other providers could be recalled through documentation and routine encounters. The attending physician responsible for most communication, a resident who repeated the same questions each morning, a phlebotomist noted for a habitual comment about difficult veins. The listed prescriber's name, however, did not attach itself to any identifiable interaction. The discharge summary was reviewed again. A section labeled Attending Physician listed a different name. A section labeled Consults listed additional names, all different. However, on the medication list, the prescriber associated with the unfamiliar medications remained consistent throughout. The situation was again considered as a possible quirk of the system. A default prescriber attached to a protocol. An outdated template. The name of a department head used as a placeholder within standardized documentation. This explanation appeared to fit, if only narrowly. Hospital systems rely heavily on templates. Language is copied forward because it is more efficient than being recreated each time. Staff frequently refer to the computer as if it were a stubborn coworker rather than a tool. Despite this, the medication list continued to show the entries as administered. Not hypothetical, not planned. When the discrepancy did not resolve itself, the prescriber's name was searched through publicly available sources. The expectation was to find a routine hospital biography, a research profile, perhaps a conference paper or a departmental PDF. The first result returned was an obituary. It was not dramatic. It appeared as a local newspaper entry archived on a funeral home website, written in careful, softened language. The full name was repeated several times. It mentioned surviving family members. It referenced volunteer work. It summarized a long career in medicine. The date warranted closer attention. The physician had died a little over 20 years earlier. The page was refreshed to confirm the information. The date remained unchanged. Another result was selected: a hospital newsletter in PDF format, posted on a web page that appeared no longer maintained. It contained a black and white photograph of a man in a white coat, smiling in a manner intended to appear reassuring. The accompanying text described a retirement celebration. The publication date of the newsletter preceded the employment dates of several current co-workers. There was no indication that this information was a prank or directed personally. The experience more closely resembled uncovering a forgotten file cabinet, material that had not been accessed in years but had never been removed. The materials were spread out in front of an open laptop. The obituary remained visible on the screen. The hospital packet remained open. Together, they resembled evidence that did not point toward any actionable conclusion. To confirm accuracy, the prescriber's name was checked again. The spelling on the patient portal was compared to the obituary. The match was exact, including the middle initial. At that point, there was an inclination to stop further review, to attribute the discrepancy to general system disorder and move on. However, the designation provider status, active, continued to stand out, similar to a sustained wrong note in an otherwise quiet environment. Several days later, a follow-up appointment occurred at a different clinic across town, unrelated to the hospital admission. The visit was routine. The attending physician requested a copy of the discharge summary, and it was agreed that it could be provided. The relevant pages were printed and placed together in a folder for the appointment. The waiting area carried the combined scent of hand sanitizer and coffee. A television displayed muted news, captions moving steadily along the bottom of the screen. Seating was arranged beneath framed landscape photographs. Administrative staff processed paperwork with a consistent, repetitive rhythm. When the discharge summary was reviewed by the attending physician, a brief nonverbal acknowledgement was noted, consistent with routine document scanning. "These were administered?" the physician asked, indicating the unfamiliar medication names with a pen. "That is how they are listed," the response indicated. "Were they prescribed for discharge use?" "No." "Was there any discussion documented regarding them?" No acknowledgement was recorded. The physician's reaction was directed toward the documentation rather than the patient, similar to the manner in which discrepancies are noted on transactional records. "It may be a charting error," the physician stated. "Sometimes orders are entered under an incorrect chart or carried forward unintentionally." "Was there any unit transferred during the stay?" "One transfer occurred," the record reflected, "from observation to a standard inpatient unit." The physician did not appear alarmed. The response suggested mild administrative frustration, as though system inefficiency had created unnecessary work. "A records request can be submitted," the physician noted, indicating that clarification could be formally pursued. Information regarding the obituary was not introduced at that time. The relevance of such information fell outside typical clinical workflows and did not align with standard documentation concerns. However, prior to leaving the clinic, a general inquiry was directed to front desk staff. "Do medication lists ever appear signed by providers who are no longer practicing?" The question was posed. A momentary pause followed. You mean retired? The staff member asked. Retired, relocated, or otherwise inactive. A neutral response was given. Older names sometimes remain on external records. Systems retain them. In many cases, even updated contact information is difficult to maintain. Could it include someone who is no longer living? The question was adjusted for neutrality. The response shifted into a more cautious register. It could, the staff member replied, if the record is old, or if the system is pulling from a template. The answer was delivered as final. Acknowledgement was given, and the interaction concluded. Later that evening, the hospital's patient portal was accessed again. No updates were observed. No corrections had been applied. The provider status remained unchanged. The medication list appeared orderly and intact. The prescriber's name remained listed as active. A call was placed to the hospital's medical records department. The purpose was clarification, not accusation. After multiple rings, the call was answered by a voice characterized by efficiency and fatigue. It was explained that the discharge packet listed medications that had not been administered. Are there any side effects being experienced? The representative asked, shifting immediately into a scripted assessment. No, the response clarified. The issue is accuracy. Typing was audible. A pause followed. I see the discrepancy, the representative said. The medication administration record can include orders that were entered and later discontinued. These entries are marked as administered, the response noted. Additional typing followed. I can open a review ticket, the representative stated. A ticket? Clarification was requested. Yes, clinical documentation can review the record. Will the record be corrected? There is no guarantee, the representative replied. However, it will be reviewed. A final question was posed carefully. Can you confirm the prescriber associated with those orders? The name was read aloud. When spoken by another party, the name carried additional weight. Is that provider currently on staff? The question followed. There was a pause, long enough to register. I do not have access to provider employment records, the representative said, which did not directly address the question. That makes sense. Acknowledgement was given, and the call concluded. Before ending the interaction, the representative asked if there were any additional concerns. There were. However, they did not align with the structure of a service request or the parameters of a ticketing system. The response given was no. Weeks passed. No follow-up communication was received. No updates appeared in the patient portal. The insurance claim was processed after submission of the requested pages, and no discrepancies were returned. The medication list was not questioned. No inquiry was made regarding the prescriber listed as active despite publicly available records indicating otherwise. Routine life activity resumed. At irregular intervals, the patient portal was accessed again, similar to verifying a secured system despite prior confirmation. No changes were observed. The list remained. The dates remained. The signature remained. An additional detail was later noted. Within the discharge summary, under the section labeled Location, a unit was listed that had not been physically occupied. The unit was marked with a notation stating, Unit temporarily unavailable. However, elsewhere in the care plan, the same unit was referenced as if operating normally. The entry appeared as a single line among many and could be easily overlooked. Closed but present. Active but absent. Over time, the irregularities did not escalate into alarm. They settled into a quieter form of awareness. Routine activities continued, during which references to the provider status would resurface. While performing household tasks, the word active associated with the profile would reappear. While reviewing work-related spreadsheets, the grid structure of medication administration times would come to mind. While standing in pharmacy lines, attention would occasionally turn to signature pads and the implication of authorization persisting beyond its origin. No physical changes were noted. No disruption to daily function occurred. No additional correspondence was issued by the hospital. There were no supplementary charges, no correction notices, no explanation. From the system's perspective, the process appeared complete and correct. Over time, the prescriber's name began to function less as an individual identifier and more as an operational reference, similar to a department label or utility designation, a sequence of characters sufficient to keep records in motion. What remained was the existence of a record documenting care that did not occur. It was authorized by an individual who should no longer be capable of authorization. The status stayed unchanged, marked complete, but still active in the system.